Can you everyone hear me?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. What I'd like to present you today is a part of my thesis in the postgraduate program, Language Education for Refugee and Migrants. The rest authors, as you may see their names below, are my supervisors in my master's degree in Hellenic Open University. In our presentation, we would like to report on emergency remote teaching in multilingual contexts. Firstly, I'd like to take a minute or two to define what exactly we mean by emergency remote teaching, TBLT, and CALL. Emergency remote teaching explicitly applies to occasions where school buildings are closed because of emergencies and learning is conducted off-site. Task-based language teaching, or TBLT, refers to the acquisition of a second language by performing real-life communicative tasks, while by computer-assisted language learning, or CALL, is described any method in which learners use technology and enhance their language. Now I'd like to focus on the current situation in Greece. Despite the migrant and refugee crisis, in March 2020, Greece faced another type of crisis, that of the risk of facing the infection of the new coronavirus disease. A number of studies have shown that a strong relationship between CALL and TBLT has been reported in Greek primary education. However, very little has been found regarding the correlation among TBLT, CALL, and second language acquisition. Keeping this in mind, we attempted to clarify how may effective Greek language lessons under emergency remote teaching be achieved. To be more specific, what we have tried to find out is how will TBLT activities supported by CALL features enhance migrant students' language learning under emergencies, and what are the key points which affect migrant students' lesson participation remotely. To deal with these research questions, we conducted a mixed methods case study to initially explore with a small sample, and then to determine if the qualitative findings are applied to a large sample. For this purpose, we firstly conducted a case study. 18 children aged 11 to 12 years with a mixed ethnic background attend the 5th grade of a Greek primary school in Athens. From them, 6 are the students with a migrant background deriving from Albania, Romania, and Moldavia. These students worked in teams to create a digital magazine. The role of the researcher and also the teacher of the class was illustrative and supportive. According to their needs analysis, 3 of the students with the migrant background are of levels A1 to A2 in Greek language. For them, a separated Greek language virtual class was created based on their conversation fluency. The rest 3 students with a migrant background of levels B1 to B2 were assigned the same tasks concerning their acquired discrete language skills. The synthesis of the learning objectives was done according to the curriculum provided by the Greek Pedagogical Institute. As the small-scale project grounded on the Greek language, geography, and physics, the objectives took into account the interdisciplinary unified curriculum and the detailed elementary school curricula. To compare the findings of our case study, any survey was conducted. It comprised a combination of 31 close-ended and open-ended questions, of allowing the participants to write in their response. 57 educators with active teaching experience in multicultural classrooms participated in it, and their answers determined the most crucial factors that affect migrant students' lesson participation remotely. I'd now like to move on to the results of the case study. On the first lesson intervention, which realized both synchronously and asynchronously, as you may see on the table, the difference in participation between bilingual students of level A and B groups is significant. On average, the native students were shown to have slightly greater involvement than in these first remote learning activities than their classmates with a migrant background. Concerning the second lesson intervention, which realized in synchronous method, only 3 of the 6 students with migrant backgrounds participated in the procedure and fulfilled the intervention's objectives, while just 1 of them completed the assigned task to present it to her classmates. The third design intervention was not highly grounded on the teleconference, so the bilingual students' participation in the assignments was increased. 4 students with migrant backgrounds participated in total. 1 student who could not connect to the WebEx completed the task after a personal teleconference with the teacher via the Viber platform, while another one fulfilled the task assisted by a step-by-step video instructor made. On the fourth teleconference, the students expressed themselves orally, presenting their posters to their classmates. 4 out of the 6 students with migrant backgrounds participated in total. 2 of the 3 bilingual students of level B created a small article regarding climate change and saving energy, while 2 students of level A composed relative sentences. All their outcomes were included in the published team magazine for the environment. The last lesson intervention was a review of the 4 previous. The students expressed themselves orally regarding their impression of this small-scale project. 5 of the students with a migrant background participated in it. As 2 of the students connected in this WebEx meeting, the teacher communicated in person with the rest 3 students via Viber or on the telephone. Finally, 4 bilingual students completed a self-assessment rubric. Moving on to the next slide, the most interesting finding of the e-survey was the non-participation of bilingual students in the teleconferences compared to the monolingual students' small absence. The major problems that the educators faced on communicating with their students and their families dealt with poor or no connection, the lack of suitable device, linguistic barriers, inability in understanding the written instructions, and psychological issues, such as the lack of interest for the lessons and the assignments, refusing to take part, and even expressing signs of sadness. Only a minority of the educators claimed that they overcame these problems, while the most of them did not overcome them at all or at a part of them. Interestingly, those who declared that they managed to overcome them, they used a variety of multimedia, such as images, videos, presentations, etc. What is remarkable here is that the grand majority believe that the refugee and migrant students are excluded from the emergency remote teaching procedure. To sum up, the results of this investigation show that the emergency remote teaching, as it was applied in March 2020 lockdown, excluded at a great rate the participation of vulnerable student population. The condition of emergency in such a sudden situation left the Greek Ministry of Education with limited available time to organize the adequate training for teachers on distance education and to offer efficient solutions for the accessibility issues that emerged. However, both the case study and the survey highlight once again that every student has unique linguistic needs and unique ways of learning. So we, the teachers, should try various strategies in teaching and in communicating with our students. A striking finding was that the educators that were more flexible in the communication methods and those who took into consideration their students' linguistic needs and interests finally managed to overcome many of the emerged issues. As regards the TBLT process, the most obvious finding to emerge here is that it is linked to the bilingual students' needs and interests, and that it is connected to their real-life activities. The case study confirmed that its remote application increases students' autonomous and critical learning ability, and enhances their computer skills while practicing their second language. Let me end by saying that overall, this case study strengthens the idea that the public school may operate as a mechanism for empowering the socioeconomically vulnerable population of society. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. We're gonna move on to the next presentation now.
Okay, thank you so much, Christina. And my computer runs just a little bit slower on Teams, so I'm going to share my screen here. Might take a minute to pull up. Okay. All right, are you all able to see?
Yes, I can see it.
Okay.
Yes.
Oh, well then I just lost it. There it go. Oh no. Sorry, hold on just a second. Hold on. Let me reshare it again. Just a moment. As I said, my computer runs a little bit slower with Teams, so I'm having to navigate here. I almost had it, and then I got too ambitious. Okay, let's try this again. Okay. All right. There we go. Okay. Hello, my name is Kristen Taylor. I'm a ABD PhD candidate in the Department of English Language and Literature at the University of Waterloo.
And I'm Sana Aboulel. I'm a PhD candidate in Educational Leadership and Policy at the University of Toronto.
And today we want to share with you our experience leading an online poetry cafe for refugee and newcomer youth in our area. To begin with, we'd like to present you with a writing prompt that is an example of the kind of writing prompts we used in our poetry cafe. This one says, if my mother tongue were a color, it would be the color of. And we invite you to fill in this writing prompt throughout the course of our presentation and just drop it in the chat for us. If my mother tongue were a color, it would be the color of. This is an example of a writing prompt that we used in our poetry cafe.
So a little bit about the Poetry Cafe itself. It was a 5-week workshop that we ran through Horizon. So Horizon is a non-for-profit organization in Kitchener-Waterloo that specializes in children, youth, and mental health, youth engagement, and community wellness. And through Horizon is another Canada-wide initiative called Pathways Canada. And Pathways Canada targets at-risk youth and aims to increase graduation rates in low SES and just at-risk neighborhoods for secondary school students. So our participants, we had 2 youth hosts who led the workshop with us. So they were also Pathways students and in secondary school. And we had, so all of our participants were registered with Pathways, secondary school students, and were of low SES.
So our vision for the workshop was that it would be a 5-week creative writing workshop on poetry that presupposes linguistic diversity as an asset to the creative writing process. And this vision came directly out of our own research and theoretical frameworks. So we wanted to engage a partnership model in creating this workshop. And the idea was that we would bring to bear many different areas of expertise to help create a curriculum that would be accessible for English language learners. We believe that no one field has all the answers for teaching English language learners, and that actually what's going to help us ultimately address the needs of English language learners in the classroom will be a cross-disciplinary approach where we're collaborating. And so in this case with the Poetry Cafe, we had 4 different areas of expertise that were represented in the collaboration. There was myself. I study translingualism, which is a language-based model that seeks to decentralize the ideal native speaker in the writing classroom, and my other area of expertise is writing studies. We also had the help of Larissa Conley, a colleague of ours who teaches at Conestoga College here in Ontario. She teaches English as a subsequent language, and she brought her expertise in second language acquisition.
And then my area of expertise is educational policy, specifically targeted at refugee and newcomer students. And we also had the expertise of our youth hosts who helped us with content, delivery, and structure of the workshop.
So the process of this was first I created a curriculum for our students to go through over the 5 weeks. And then I took that curriculum to Sana and Larissa and our youth hosts. And then each one reviewed and gave feedback on the curriculum. So one of the first areas that became apparent in our collaboration was cultural difficulties within the writing prompts. So a good example of this would be cultural and language difficulties. So in the first week, I thought it would be a great idea to do a writing prompt from a scaffolded poem, meaning you take a poem that's already been written and you take out key words and then allow the students to fill in those words like a Mad Libs and then create their own poem. And I thought that this would be accessible for English language learners because it already has a structure. But Senna and Larissa both pointed out that in order to fill out a scaffolded poem such as this, the students would have to have a firm grip on language structure, such as what are nouns, what are verbs, what are adjectives. And they also pointed out that the poem I had chosen had some cultural references, North American cultural references that would be hard for refugee newcomers to access. So we ended up not using this writing prompt and instead used a writing prompt where the students got to write about a place that they envision only, that they visit only in their dreams. The second thing that our collaboration brought to light were emotional nuances in the writing prompts. So some of the writing prompts asked the students to write about emotionally nuanced things which outpaced their mastery of the English language. And so we were able to revise those prompts to help the students write more directly about their experiences. Also, idiomatic language considerations came up in the curriculum, and Senna and Larissa pointed out for me places in the curriculum where I used idiomatic language. And even though the curriculum was not something the students would be reading directly, it did raise my awareness for how I rely on idiomatic language when I'm leading the workshops. And so I was able to remove some of that and be aware of that as I was leading the workshops in conjunction with my team, with Senna and our youth hosts.
So another consideration we had was with internal translation and time. So some activities in our curriculum set time limits for students to complete a specific task. But we realized that for ELL and newcomer students specifically, this would cause pressure, like added pressure and stress that we didn't want to include in our activities. So we ended up switching timed prompts to more task-based prompts. So instead of having 10 minutes to create a list of 25 things, we just said create a list of 25 things. So we took away the time limit and tried to make things a little bit easier for these students, specifically because this setting a time limit would imply that students would be able to translate from their native tongue to English within that time limit. And that was just an added pressure we didn't want to include. And then for our youth host and peer contribution, one of our youth hosts pointed out we originally had a poem called a villanelle, which is a bit of a complex poem to write. So she had pointed out that this may be too difficult for some of our ELL students, and so we replaced it with a haiku, which is a little bit more simple and accessible. Our youth host also raised awareness about sensitivity around sharing and editing work. Me and Kristen had believed that it would be a great space to be able to share the poems that we come up with in the Poetry Cafe and be open to editing and criticism. Our youth host pointed out that some ELL students would not be comfortable with this, so we took that out of the curriculum entirely. And our youth hosts also were responsible for leading the reflection and the discussion time, specifically about the writing process and after each of our writing activities.
So the most successful part of this creative writing workshop was the collaboration to build the curriculum. And then we brought this curriculum, this accessible curriculum we had created, and we ran right into the technical difficulties that happen with an online delivery. And we had to deliver the workshop online because of COVID. And so we had to adapt it to Zoom. Some of the pros that we found were the chat feature in Zoom, which allowed shy students to write their responses if they didn't feel comfortable enough with language yet to speak it. There was also an annotated feature for collaboration in Zoom, which proved to be really productive, in which everybody could write on the screen and we could work on writing together. And then we were able to supplement some of the other technology in to help with the sterile feel of the online environment, such as sharing ambient sound of like a Japanese garden or a cafe while we were doing the free writing process.
So we also ran into some cons and some challenges with using Zoom for a creative writing workshop. So one of the main one was bandwidth difficulties. Some of our students would be like popping in and out of the workshop because their audio wouldn't work or their video would be cutting out. So that created a bit of a disconnect for us. And also, although the chat feature is great and definitely a pro, it meant that a lot of our students had their videos turned off. And that also created more of a disconnect when we were trying to create like a more welcoming and open and safe space. And also we realized that through Zoom, the focus gets funneled to one person rather than having a circular and collaborative environment, which we were kind of hoping for the poetry workshop. And it also limited our ability to differentiate instruction, which led to a lack of universal design in our curriculum. So for ELL students, it's often important to be able to deliver instructions in multiple ways and to be able to have activities that that basically are like relate to multiple aspects for ELL students. So things like visual cues and things like verbal cues and writing instructions on the board, repeating instructions multiple times. So these are all things that would have been really important if we were doing this in person and would have been helpful for our students. And we also realized that it was really hard to do one-on-one check-ins with students through Zoom. Although we had the chat feature available where you can private message a person, it didn't work out for our students, and none of our students took the initiative to ask questions if they didn't understand anything. We had one student who completed a 15-minute activity, and when we came back to share, she actually told us that she didn't understand the activity or the instructions. And if we were in an in-person environment, we would have been able to check in, pick up on nonverbal cues and body language, which is really important when working with ELL students. And so we wanted to also show an example of our most successful session with the haikus. And what we did here was we walked through a free write. So this is my free write from the session itself. And we had the students using the annotation and collaboration feature on Zoom take the free write and turn it into a haiku. So the original free write was "My name means lightning. When you say Senna, I hear the sky begin to shake. Sometimes the earth splits into two when I shout, and a little piece of the sun is buried forever. Funny how I am light, yet also the absence of it." And our students did an awesome job, and they switched it to a perfect haiku that was "My name means lightning. Listen, when you say Senna, the sky starts to shake." So it was awesome to see them grasp the concepts that we had and turn it into a haiku with collaboration.
So further considerations for teaching creative writing online to language diverse writers would be to consider the material realities of the writers, their ability to access technology and how stable that technology is. Also prepare for the learning experience to be more disconnected in person. So it was surprising to Senna and I, who both have taught online, just how much more the creative writing process requires an embodied presence. And that just was a difficult thing to really get our hands around, to really manage in the online Zoom setting. And I'm reminded of Christina's presentation just before ours, where she said the teachers that were most successful were the ones that used multimedia. And I think that might be a way forward, is to not only rely on Zoom, but other media as well. And also, the most successful part of this experience for us was the cross-disciplinary partnerships. And moving forward, we would continue to do that with future creative writing workshops online, is to access the multiple spheres of knowledge that everyone can bring to the table in order to meet the really unique needs of these English language learning students.
And another consideration was to prepare for the difficulties that can arise from tech, and to look for ways to mitigate the way these difficulties can disrupt the creative writing process specifically.
And that's it from us. Thank you.
Thank you, Christine. Now let's move on to Q&A session.
I would be interested to know from Christina. I was, struck by how she had said that the teachers that were most successful were the ones that utilized multimedia. And I was wondering if she could talk a little bit more about that combination of multimedia, how they used that to reach their students.
Okay, thank you for asking. Okay, let me come back to what I said before. I believe that three are the key points of the teacher's efficient work. Firstly, to create real-life tasks for the students, based, of course, on the grades curriculum, and to urge them to work autonomously in teams to complete them. Next, to adapt these tasks to the bilingual students' linguistic level according to their needs analysis. And finally, to be persistent and exploratory with the communicative approach with the students, and not stuck on the governmental instructions. For example, here in Greece, the instructions from the Greek ministry was to use the WebEx. My students could not all of them use the WebEx efficiently. So I tried to find other ways of communicating with them, such as trying to call her. But then I could not explain them very easily how to do the the task, how to accomplish it. So then I tried Viber, and then I used a lot of multimedia. With multimedia, I mean a lot of images, a lot of creations. For example, I tried to use the online program Canvas. Canva, I'm sorry. The Canva platform. With the Canva platform, they can create a lot of posters, a lot of images on their own. It is very easy for them. That is only an idea. Another one was to use the Padlet platform. The Padlet, it's like posting everything you find in the internet, from an article, a song on the YouTube, songs from different cultures, with the same objective. We had the environment, so students worked on the subject of the environment to upload relative articles or videos or songs or images or whatever they find interesting. And that it was the more striking for them. They liked it a lot, and all of their outcomes, they belong now to a digital magazine. So everything it was used. Finally, I'm sorry about my English.
No, that's very good. That's so interesting, and it makes me think of, it allows them to become digitally literate as well as literate in writing and in their education.
Thank you.
Thank you. Biswajit has a question for Christina. What is the research period that you considered in your case study?
I'm sorry, could you please repeat the question?
Yes, you can see it in the chat. What is the research period that you consider in your case study?
What is the period?
The research period.
The research period.
Yeah.
Yes, it was during the first lockdown in Greece on March 2020. It lasted for 3 months. It lasted 3 months until June. That was the first period.
I have a question for Christine.
Yes.
Is it your workshop about the poetry or writing in general?
It was about poetry. Senna and I both decided to work on poetry. Senna has written 2 books of poetry, and I have my MFA in creative writing in nonfiction, creative nonfiction, and poetry. And we felt that poetry would be a good starting place to try to use this collaborative partnership model and allow students who are learning English to exercise their ability to express themselves and not have to worry about academic English or grammar or punctuation, but to focus more on the art of writing. And that's why we had decided to start with poetry. But hopefully, as we continue to work together, we can do different genres other than poetry.
Is writing poetry different from writing in general?
Yeah, I'll let Senna answer that question because she's written 2 books of poetry.
Yeah, so I would argue that poetry is a very different genre than writing, like either academically or just moving into like nonfiction or fiction writing. Poetry is very emotion-based and very personal, like very based in a person's personal experiences. And so it's a bit of a different genre to navigate through, and it's a bit of a more vulnerable genre to navigate, which we found in our workshop as well. So I would argue that poetry is quite different than other areas of writing. I don't know if Kristen has a different opinion there, but that's my stance on it.
Yeah, no, I agree. And the teacher scholars that we've read that have published about teaching creative writing to English language learners have all used poetry. Poetry, as Senna was saying, it's based in experience and expression, and it's also very reliant on imagery and figurative language, which tends to be more artistic and also allows you to play with the rules and boundaries of language a bit more, which I think can be more accessible for English language learners. English language learners, in my experience teaching them, do really interesting things with English, and they're not necessarily breaking the rules of English. It's just maybe they're not following, as we said, like the idiomatic ways in which those of us who English is our mother tongue, we've just gotten stuck in these very rigid sort of ideals of how English should work. But when you're in poetry, working with poetry, I found it helps, I think, English language learners to have a little more freedom to do interesting things with language and not worry about their hands getting slapped over incorrect grammar or something like that. And I think in the end lets them become even more confident in their languaging abilities.
Did the students find it hard to write poetry?
I can answer that too, and then Senna, if you want to jump in as well. I don't think they found it hard to write poetry. I think we found it hard to engage poetry through the medium of Zoom. That was tricky. But we ended the workshop with a poetry reading where they each shared poetry that they had written, and it was wonderful. The writing they came up with was really exciting. And I think, especially since they're teenagers, they love that they can write about their emotions and their experiences. So yeah, they had some really beautiful poems that they came up with at the end. I would just say it was just tricky trying to walk them through the poetry writing process over Zoom, because the creative process, in my experience, is a vulnerable process that really requires a safe environment to experiment. And it's just really hard to duplicate that in a virtual setting. It takes longer to build up that camaraderie. It takes longer to create a sense of safety and trust. But in terms of the actual writing the poetry, I didn't get the sense that they struggled with that. I don't know, Senna, what did you find?
I also don't think that they struggled. I know that for most of our students, actually, it was their first time actually writing poetry and engaging in poetry. So it was daunting for them, and it might have been a little bit overwhelming for some of our students, but I think we scaffolded the process of writing each poem very well, and we showed examples and we shared our own work as well to kind of set the tone. So like Kristen said, in the Poetry Cafe, we had some amazing poems being read from these students. So I think I don't think they had a hard time. I think we broke it down pretty well into like small digestible pieces for them.
But I agree. And I think, it's interesting. We don't often think of using creative genres for teaching writing to English language learners. I mean, I think so often in our, at least in the programs where I'm teaching, the emphasis is really on academic writing, English for academic purposes, that's how we want to help them increase their communication skills, is through these academic formal genres. But I believe the reality is that these creative genres, such as poetry and fiction and creative nonfiction, can be just as beneficial to helping improve communication and allowing the students a gentler landing when it comes to mastering how to communicate in English in an academic setting. So I think we dismiss the creative genres too quickly when we think about helping English language learners with their communication skills, because I think the creative genres actually, and other teacher scholars who've published in this, and Senna sent me, a handful of articles about teacher scholars who had been teaching English language learners through creative genres, that what they found is actually it's a wonderful genre to teach students in to help them master language.
Thank you, Christine.
I think the question in the chat is for Christina.
I'm sorry, I don't see anything.
In the chat, this question asks you what kind of limitations you faced during your research.
What kind of? I'm sorry.
Limitations.
Limitations.
You faced during your research.
Yes. The limitations I faced concern the non-participation of some students, and particularly one student, I can remember now, one student that refused to take part to anything. He refused to take part on the teleconferences. He refused to complete the assignments. All of a sudden. And I tried to communicate with his family. His mother was super cooperative with me, but he finally expressed signs of sadness, I think, with all of that sudden situation of the lockdown. That was something that it was a kind of limitation for me, because I tried very, very much to communicate with all of them, with all of the students, and especially the bilingual ones.
I think that's such an interesting point. That's such a good point to consider, that in both cases, in Christina's case and in our case with the workshop, we weren't just teaching online in a neutral way. We were teaching online because of COVID, because of the lockdown, and that did create another element that I think impacted the learning experience for all of our participants. So yeah, thank you for highlighting that, Christina, because it is a very real, very real, I don't know the word, factor in trying, in this particular way, trying to teach online. It wasn't like we were, they were self-selecting into learning online because it was available. It was because we all had to do it online. Thank you for the question. Petra is asking, did all students have access to computers? All of our students did have access to computers, although they didn't all have access to great bandwidth and Wi-Fi. I don't know, Christina, for your case study, if they all had access to computers or not.
No, this was another limitation indeed. We have not every student had access to a suitable device. I think I mentioned it in my presentation before, and the ministry declared that it would give some devices, some portable, some PCs, some tablets to the students that they don't have in their family device, but this was very, very little for the percentage of the students that they didn't have one. Like, I don't know, 2% for the school's needs. Yes, and another similar problem it was that the family had just one smartphone. It was the smartphone of the father or of the mother, and the time that we have been arranged the teleconference, the father or the mother, he or she was working, and we then had to arrange a meeting in person with the specific student in the afternoon, just he or she and me to fulfill the tasks and the assignments. I'm sorry, did I answer to your question?
Yes. Yes, that was great.
Can I have a question? Can the students have access to the course via mobile phone, or they can only do it on the laptop?
The students could not do everything we had arranged on the smartphone, but the most of the online platforms that we used was accessible via the smartphones. That was another problem, yes, with the WebEx meeting also, that some smartphones could not connect to the teleconference, or the students could not find the way, or their families could not find the way how to connect to the teleconferences, even if we had sent them the instructions how to connect. Despite all of this, we and the students made the best that they could. And we managed to communicate after all. But the key point here is that the teacher have to always to try to find out something new, something else, something that suits to how a specific student learns. How a specific student can answer, can complete an assignment. Everyone learns in different way and communicates in different way and use different programs. Have different favorable programs to do this.
Thank you, Christina. How about your case, Christine?
Yeah, so they did need to have a computer. I mean, they could get on a phone as well. Our only platform we used was Zoom. And so, yes, they were able to access both via computer and phone. And I think all of them used a computer. I don't know. Senna may know that better than me.
We had one student who used a phone.
Okay.
But otherwise, everyone was on a computer.